Are you in danger of squandering your reputation as a global climate champion because some of your actions are against that ultimate goal?
We got quite the developments here. Welcome back to Moose on Loose. My name's David. Today we've got Anita Nan. She's over in China now, meeting with senior officials over there. She's kind of greasing the wheels for Mark Carney to go over there. And with that, we're seeing closer ties being mended there. Why are they doing that? Obviously, because it works in Mark Carney's favor for what he's invested in, his green agenda. This is going to put further strain on the relationship with Donald Trump in America. Let's jump into this.
The diplomatic relationship between Canada and China appears to be on the mend after years of strain and a more recent escalation in trade tensions. But Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand was in Beijing this past week, where she held bilateral trade talks with her Chinese counterpart Wang Yi, with both Ottawa and Beijing agreeing to reopen communication lines, potentially paving the way for a summit between Mark Carney and Xi Jinping. Because this is only the second time that a Canadian foreign minister has visited China in some 8 years. Is it fair to say that this is significant?
Yes, I think this is a significant development. I see this as, at a very bare minimum, a thawing of relations. But I'm also fairly cautious about it. I think it could potentially signal warming of ties between the two countries, but I think it's still early days.
Obviously, it's a warming of ties here because Mark Carney, he's already business partners with Xi Jinping. He was there last year as a U.S. business leader, by the way. It doesn't matter what part of Mark Carney's investments we look at. It all leads back to the same thing, which all points back to China, whether it's his creation of the Glasgow Finance for Net Zero GFANZ, and you have companies like Occidental here who essentially pivoted their business to embrace Mark Carney's GFANZ formula. Obviously, Brookfield's investment in everything green, you can see the green leaves here, is across the charts, is quite substantial. But this all comes back to the carbon credit system. They have carbon credit companies, investments around the world. They're pushing everything to this, and they need China's help because China makes the majority of solar panels, the wind turbines, all that stuff, which makes me think there's some sort of tie here that's deeper than just what we see here between Mark Carney and Xi Jinping. His business meeting he had last year with Xi Jinping. Does Mark Carney have investments in China that we don't know about in green tech?
Are we also in a climate crisis?
We are in a climate crisis,
okay. Yeah. That's the last time we spoke was at the Glasgow Climate Conference. Grab your headphones because I want to play you something that you said around that time when you were the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance. Here's what you said.
Human frailties create a tragedy of the horizon. That means the catastrophic impacts of climate change will fall largely on future generations. The current generation, with our horizons fixated on the current news, business, and political cycles, has few direct incentives to solve the issue, even though the sooner we act, the less costly it will be.
You are really well known for these words, this phrase, the tragedy of the...
What is this smile? This creepy Grinch smile? Does anyone else see it? This creeps me out when he gets this smile because you know he's up to something.
This phrase, the tragedy of the horizon. Yeah. It's all about how you need to think long term rather than in terms of a short-term horizon. And yet in office, you scrapped the consumer carbon tax. You paused the mandate that was pushing car makers to sell more and more electric vehicles. And there are now reports that you are about to drop the cap on emissions from the oil and gas sector. What happened to you?
I'm the same me. I'm focused on the same issues. And the question is, how do you make progress towards those issues? And particularly, how do you make progress in a way that is most effective? How do you make progress most effectively? So I'll break those issues down. The consumer carbon tax was at best going to be responsible for high single-digit proportion of emissions reductions over the course of the next 25 years.
They projected it like 7%. They were destroying our economy over 7% reduction in emissions of a country that's only a couple percent effect on the global carbon on planet Earth. It's quite unreal what they did.
So it was something, but it was far from the most important measure that was in place. It was extremely politically divisive, and it would have contributed to a government in place that would have canceled all climate policies in effect.
Carney's about to go over to China and mend the relationship. I bet a big deal actually comes out of that because it supports his agenda.
There are many hurdles to overcome. such as, public opinion in Canada towards China, because they have arbitrarily detained 2 Canadians before. They have also recently imposed another round of trade coercion on our canola oil, pork, and seafood products. And all these things, irk Canadian public. And
on top of that, they've got like 1 million people, Uyghurs, in a detention camp, treating them essentially like prisoners. Is that something Canadians care about? And what do we do to reward them for putting tariffs on our canola industry? We give them $1 billion contract to build BC ferries. But now we found out that this is just a grift, almost repayment for the money that went to the Asian Infrastructure Bank, flowed over to McKinsey, and now China wants to cash in. They want a project for their own. Send them the BC ferries contract. Who cares about Canadian workers or Canadian steel? Build it in China. That's what the Liberals who are funding this, putting up that loan, have agreed to. And when asked about that, Chrystia Freeland lied about her knowledge about it. And when it happened, the timeline, it's disgraceful.
But overall, I think I'm a tad more optimistic than I was a couple of months ago.
This is not going to make things easier with Donald Trump and the Americans. This is going to make it worse. The Americans are in their own trade war with the Chinese right now. We should be making a deal to help the Americans against the Chinese with our canola to strengthen their position and get ourselves a deal. But instead, we're doing the opposite. Mark Carney's going to go there, shake hands with his business partner, Xi Jinping, and try to get as much green tech as possible coming from China over to Canada and then roll out his carbon credit system.
That's the design of that carbon tax, that aspect of the carbon tax relative to...
Yeah, it wasn't perfect. I get
it wasn't
that.
perfect. But so the question is, how do you use scarce government capital, government dollars, taxpayers' dollars, and political capital in order to have the maximum effect? And so the maximum effect, so let me go more directly to what we are doing. So one of the biggest, 20% of the emissions in Canada, thereabouts, comes from the building sector, from houses and commercial buildings. We've done very little in terms of reducing those emissions. We are now embarking on one of the biggest home building measures in our history, which is more than 20% lower embedded carbon in the production of these homes, more than 20% lower carbon footprint in the running of these homes. So that in itself is a housing strategy, it's an economic strategy, but it's a climate strategy at the same time.
The key question one must ask is, are these 20% reductions in emissions going to cost Canadians more money? We know the answer to this. This is not going to make houses cheaper. We've got this clip here showing that government charges and taxes account for 35% of the cost of homes.
You state, and I noted in your submission, that Canada's gap between the price of homes and what people earn has doubled since 1987. Safe to say the bulk of that gap has occurred in the past 10 years, would you say?
I don't have that statistic in front of me. I don't think that one was in my brief necessarily, but we have certainly...
So you can see here, she's the National Senior Director of Public Policy, Habitat for Humanity Canada.
Seen an acceleration in a gap in the families that we serve.
Thank you. No other G7 country has seen such a stark deterioration in housing affordability. Again, a quote from your website, actually. A lot of this is inflation. A lot of inflation is driven by government policy, of course. But as far as housing goes, inflation shows up in a few ways. There's the price of a house includes things like the mortgage costs, which historically are actually still pretty low compared to where we've been in the past, but higher in the last couple of years. But then there's building costs, and those building costs include goods and labor. There's demand pull inflation and there's cost push inflation. But then there's the third one, which is the land. Which one of these factors, the goods, the labor, or the land, do you think are the ones that increase housing costs the most?
In our experience, it's very market specific. So again, in our highest cost markets, that could be a matter of land. In the areas where we...
If I may, I think the most journalists have come out and said, yes, it is land speculation that drives 30%, 35% now of the cost. But one of the other charges in there, of course, with land in civic areas is government charges. So there is a significant amount of taxes and civic charges at all three levels of government that the government collects taxes for that accounts for about 35% now of the cost of homes, which is a significant increase over the amount even 10 years ago. Is that impacting your operations at all?
Fortunately for us at Habitat Humanity, we are often exempted from some of those fees and charges. It's one of the advantages of investing in non-market home builders is that we get additional financial efficiency. Certainly, it is a challenge for our private market partners, and we, in our work that we do with them, can appreciate that it has become a growing challenge.
And certainly it's a problem for everyday Canadians just going out and trying to buy a house when the costs have gone up, which is going to the government.
And would you say that the places where you build your homes are in places where your competitors, builders, would be paying these 35% charges?
Certainly. They're facing a lot of charges themselves.
All right. Thank you.
Price of homes has already been pushed up because of the cost of materials, inflation, and government taxes. What do you think adding another 20% reduction in carbon, CO2, in the creation of new green homes is going to do? It's going to continue to jack the prices of our homes. It will make housing even more expensive in Canada. Will it be good for the carbon credit industry that Mark Carney's invested in? Yeah, it will be. Will it be good for Canadians? No. No, it will not.
And yet I'm reading your book, which is all about values rather than market value, and reading the way that you emphasize that these are urgent issues, that everything you do ought to take you towards a step further towards the common good, which is keeping global temperatures as close to 1.5 degrees as you can. You're the only G7 leader who has been a UN envoy on climate action.
That's
and
true.
the world is
He's really proud of that. Look at him, ready to pat himself on the back.
I'm crying out for leadership on this, right? President Trump is calling climate change a hoax. Are you in danger of squandering your reputation as a global climate champion because some of your actions are against that ultimate goal?
I'd a few things in what you said. First, it's not about my role as Prime Minister is not about my reputation. My role as Prime Minister is about what's in the best interest of Canada. Canadian.
Come on. This guy can't be serious. Really? This guy's conflicted out the wazoo with all of his conflicts of interest, all of them. And those are the self-disclosed ones, not the ones he's actually financially currently conflicted with. All of these ones. If you picked up what he said here, he's talking about the housing industry, 20% reductions, all that, modular homes. Well, Brookfield owns Modular Group. So he mentioned that. He also mentioned energy. For example, Great Lakes Power Corporation, Brookfield Renewable subsidiary, hydroelectric power. So they're trying to corner this market. They want to force all of this into these areas, and then Brookfield's obviously already a world leader on this, bringing more business, subsidies sliding Brookfield's way, but also giving birth to this, the carbon credit market, this whole thing here, high integrity removals, low integrity removals. It'll be mostly on the top end here, because this is where the big money is, the DAC, direct air capture, machines that suck CO2 out of the air and store it underground, bioinjection, turns plant waste into bio oil, injects it underground, and these kind of things. This is where Brookfield's going to make their big money, and this is where you're going to have company like Stripe, who created Frontier Group with the backing of Apple, Shopify, Meta, and McKinsey, the same McKinsey that got money from the Asian Infrastructure Bank in China, that McKinsey. They're all trying to push this whole market. They're desperately trying to get this going. It all pushes towards this carbon credit system. So for him, it doesn't matter if he removes the emissions cap or removes the carbon tax, as long as he can push the Pathways Project and push the carbon credit system into all aspects of our lives, he will get stinking rich. I'm sure his Brookfield buddies and maybe some of his other minister buddies or Doug Guzman, all these appointees he's bringing in, will also get stinking rich. Because we know from Tim Hodgson's investments, he doesn't have them disclosed. We don't know what his ministers, his right-hand men, are invested in. The flood of solar panels and windmills from China isn't going to save us. Look at this post here from the New York Post. 2.2 billion solar plant in California scheduled to be turned off after years of wasted money. Never lived up to its promises. This is from a month ago. This is not some old article. So they built this huge solar farm out in the desert. You can see here in 2011, U.S. Department of Energy under Barack Obama issued $1.6 billion in 3 federal loan guarantees to build this. Here's the facility itself. These are all solar panels. It's a huge solar array. And how did this turn out? Well, we've got it here. It says never lived up to its promises, producing less electricity than expected while relying on natural gas to stay operational. You can't make this stuff up. This technology is not good enough yet. If they can make this technology more efficient, then it'll have some legs to stand on. While we can fantasize about these solar panel arrays all we want, the technology is just not efficient enough to make this work. This being older technology, this one I believe reflected light to these pillars up here. It is different technology, but still, it doesn't matter how you slice it. It is not the solution.
Canadians care about the world. They care about climate action. They care about their fellow citizens. They care about all of those things. Those values of sustainability and solidarity, fairness are fundamental to Canadians. What we need to do is to be as effective as possible in terms of addressing climate change while growing our economy.
So what are you going to do about emissions from the oil and gas sector?
Well,
there is a cap that's supposed to come in. Is it true that you're considering dropping it?
What we're focused on, look, you can say there's a cap, but saying a cap doesn't make it happen. What makes the emissions go down in the oil and gas sector, as long as Canada and America are using oil and gas, and we are, our economies are wired for that, as is
He's dropping the emissions cap. This is pretty interesting development here.
The rest of the world. What makes those emissions go down will be carbon capture and storage, particularly in other efficiencies.
So you are dropping it then? That's what it sounds like.
We're dropping emissions from the oil and gas sector.
Dropping the cap.
Dropping emissions, Michelle, from the oil and gas sector. This is the point. This is about results. The climate cares about results. It doesn't care about a policy that is... An outcome is not a policy. A desired outcome is not a policy.
So
I can't figure out if he's going to drop the emissions cap or if he's planning to use carbon capture to drop the emissions so the cap technically can't get hit. Is that what he's doing here?
I think the strong signals that particular policy to have a cap on emissions from the oil and gas sector is not going to happen.
An outcome is not a policy. What makes a difference to the climate is whether or not emissions come down. What's required for the Canadian oil sands, in this case, what we're talking about, is carbon and capture and storage. We signaled our first major nation-building project is something called the Pathways, which will get those emissions down. Second thing.
No, it won't. We've already had an expert call it a load of crap. So it is true, Mark Carney did announce this as one of his major projects, Pathways projects right here, etc. But unfortunately, Mark Carney's invested in ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, and Canadian Natural Resources, all involved in the Pathways project. You don't have to take my word for it. You can go to moosechart.com yourself. Click on those little links in the corners there. Here we've got the Pathways Alliance. You can scroll down the names of them right here. ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil is Imperial or owns it. Canadian Natural Resources right there. Carney's invested in this. He's going to be profiting off of this. And this link next to it here, Pathways Carbon Capture Project is not viable, expert warns. New report from CCS proposal is a subsidy-dependent financial risk with limited revenue potential. So I've already done a whole video on this thing, but this report here breaks down that this Pathways project, carbon capture, it's a grift. It's a waste of money. It'll be a big taxpayer-funded money pit. And a money pit for no reason that won't generate anything aside from sticking carbon in the ground, which is not valuable to us building our economy.
Related to this, and this is crucial from a climate perspective, is ending methane, what's so-called fugitive methane flaring, which is, depending on your horizon, and the horizon that we're all in the next few decades in terms of climate warming, is up to 70 times bigger contributor to climate change than CO2 emissions. And so we have an opportunity. We're working with the industry, working with the provinces to get those emissions, methane emissions, down to zero.
You are.
So I've never heard him talk about methane. What he mentioned there, fugitive methane flaring, refers to the practice of burning methane-rich gas that unintentionally escapes or it is naturally vented from oil and gas operations to reduce its climate impact. Explaining
the complexity of what you're dealing with. And I guess I just wonder whether the Mark Carney of 2020 would be slightly disappointed in the Mark Carney of 2025.
I think if you look in in fact, I know that looking in that book, that you've got your hand on, you will see two important things in there. One is a discussion of exactly what I just said, the emissions reductions, and secondly, carbon value for money, which is a fundamental point, which is using scarce public dollars to most efficiently reduce emissions.
In fact, to your point, on the back of Anita Anand's visit, Beijing has said it's willing to restart dialogues at all levels. We're looking at a revival of the existing strategic partnership. What is the diplomatic and economic potential here? You know, given the fact that China is our second biggest trading partner, and like you said, our trade ties with the US are fairly strained at the moment.
Yeah, so let me give you some perspective of what I think Beijing might be thinking right now. So aside from kind of sectorial calculation on trade, such as canola oil, such as EVs, I think more broadly speaking, we have seen Beijing toning down on its wolf warrior diplomacy, partly because, Chinese economic recovery has been very slow. Growth has been concentrated only in the high-tech sector, and overall it still need to boost its exports as well as developing good relations with with the rest of the world. And U.S.-China relations are in very high tension right now. So from
Exactly. That's why we should be doing a deal with America right now. Get canola into America, stick it to the Chinese, and then have America drop our tariffs. Carney has to roll out a big package right now. And with that, a big deal on canola to empower Trump. If it helps Trump against the Chinese, this is a great position to negotiate. But once again, we basically have an American running Canada, so he's going to do what's best for his own stocks and not for our country.
that very strategic perspective, Beijing would want Canada on its side. But, we should be well aware that, there are fundamental clashes of values, political values that are very important to Canada. Those things we might not be able to agree with China 100%. But on certain things, I think, there are things beyond trade, beyond immediate tariff considerations that are of political alliance, strategic importance that we should be in dialogue with Beijing.
The dialogue we should be having is with America right now. And we should be cutting those EV tariffs immediately to save our canola industry. It's wild what we've got going on here. We've got buffoons running our country.